Here we are on a cold Vegas, windy morning, and we're going to talk about an engine that's not very well understood. It's the 5.3 LS. The 5.3 LS is an excellent engine, but I think that it is overlooked by a lot of guys because they perceive it as being not enough power or not enough performance boost over the stock engine to make sense putting it in their JK. And I somewhat disagree with that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The LS 5.3 benefits are it is low cost, it runs on regular gas, it's extremely reliable. Most of you know that GM put them in their SUV truck line for many, many years. It has over 300 horsepower, and with a little bit of tuning, you can easily get 350 horsepower out of a 5.3 LS. 5.3 LSs can go 300,000 miles plus if taken care of. So where does a 5.3 LS make sense? It makes sense in a light JK, a JK with lighter tires, a JK that's not all pimped out. One that you don't have 40s, 1-tons, compressors, skid plates, armor, and all that on it. Now, don't get me wrong, we've installed them on those vehicles and they actually do pretty good, but they don't have the cubic inches of the 6.2, they don't have the direct injection of the LTs. So as long as you apply the 5.3 in the proper application, it's an excellent engine. I'm driving a relatively light two-door, and this 5.3 moves it just fine. Merging onto the freeway is effortless. The 3.8 engine really wasn't a bad engine. They used that engine for a lot of years in their minivan line, and it worked pretty good. The minivans didn't have 40-inch tires. They were aerodynamically pretty good. The problem with the 3.8 and a JK is we went to a much heavier vehicle with really bad aerodynamics, and then once you modify the thing and you put large tires on it, add weight, add drag, the 3.8 really had to work hard. It was a small displacement engine, and it was old technology. Didn't have the technology of the Pentastar or any of the newer engines that have come out recently. So there's no arguing that the 3.8 was overwhelmed in the JK that was modified. Now if you take a 3.8 and you put a supercharger on it, and let's say you pick up 80 horsepower, you're pushing 280 horsepower. And the 5.3 is about 320 horsepower out of the box. By the time you do a couple of tweaks to it, we're talking 350 horsepower. So a lot of guys say it's just not worth it, especially when you compare it to the Pentastar, because the Pentastar was 280 horsepower stock from Chrysler. But I'll argue with that, and here's the reasoning. The 5.3 is a V8. It sounds like a V8. It pulls like a V8. It's going to last in a low-stress situation like a V8. You don't have to have a supercharger on it to get that kind of horsepower. You're going to have linear throttle response, and in most situations get better mileage. My wife drove a 5.3 LS and a 2008 JKU for about 10 years, and we averaged over 20 miles to the gallon on the highway and in the high teens around town, and that was better than the manual transmission 3.8 could do. So what it comes down to is the 5.3 LS just needs to be put into its environment, and that environment is smaller tires, lighter JK, or a pimped out JK that runs around mostly on the street or off-road. They're awesome off-road. I got some pretty hardcore guys running the 5.3s off-road because you don't need 500 horsepower off-road. Now I'm not taking anything away from the 6.2 LS, the 6.0 LS, or the LTs. They're awesome in their own right. But what you're getting with the 5.3 LS is very low cost. You can pick up a 5.3 LS for under $1,000. In fact, I bought an LY5, which is an earlier 5.3, for $800, and it had relatively low miles on it. So if you pick up a 2010 up LC9 or LMG with a 6L80 for under $2,000, which you can do if you get a higher mileage one, and don't be afraid to get one with 50, 60, 70,000 miles. The original LH6 in the first JK we ever did is still on the road, and it's pushing 200,000 miles right now. You're still probably going to get better longevity with a 50,000 mile LS 5.3 than you will with a new 3.8 or 3.6. And if you put a blower on your 3.8 or 3.6, you're probably going to go through a couple of them in the lifespan of one LS 5.3. And the LS 5.3 with some mild mods, and I just did one from a guy in Missouri where he had some headers and a cam in it, and it was pushing close to 400 horsepower. That engine was definitely more powerful than a 6.0. You know my theory about buying the horsepower you want, but if you ever did want more out of a 5.3, you could get it. So if we do the math and you pick up an engine and transmission for about $2,000, you buy our kit, which currently is on sale, you can easily be into the swap for well under $10,000. Now, if you consider that you're going to go out and buy a supercharger for $5,000 or $6,000, by the time you're done tuning it, maybe you bought some stainless steel headers or exhaust, you're not far off from the price of a 5.3. Of course, there is the labor of installing the 5.3, but once you're done, you got an engine that's going to basically last longer than your JK in most situations. It's going to go 200, 300,000 miles. You're going to have this, and if you listen to the vehicle I'm in, you're going to have that V8 sound, that V8 torque, linear throttle response, no cruise control hunting. On the highway, it's for the most part going to stay in 6th gear. When you go up mountain grades, it is going to hunt a little bit. It's going to drop down into 5th, and on some steep grades, it might even drop into 4th. If you're a high altitude, running larger tires, towing a trailer, it might even drop more than that. So that's the downside to the 5.3. When you put it under a lot of load, the larger displacement engines just make more sense. But if you don't put it under a heavy load, or your JK is light, I've got lots of these 5.3s running around. And here's something a lot of you guys probably don't care about, but you might want to consider because things are changing in this country: emissions. The 5.3 LS currently has an executive order from the California Air Resource Board for MOTEC. As far as I know, it's the first cross-manufacturer OBD2 executive order issued by the California Air Resource Board. What that basically means is you can register your vehicle in all 50 states. You can sell your vehicle with confidence. If you have a vehicle, let's say it's a Hemi and you have the monitors turned off, or if you have a hybrid where you're running a GM engine and a Chrysler transmission, these are technically illegal by the feds, the US EPA. So while you might be in a jurisdiction where you're allowed to register it, if you were to sell it and 2 owners later, it goes to California or Nevada or wherever and it gets flagged, you could potentially be liable for that. So when you add things up, the low cost, the fact that you can run regular gas, the longevity, and when I say longevity, to get 200,000 or 300,000 miles out of a powertrain, virtually repair-free other than maybe some oil changes, flushing the coolant, etc., you have to look at the return on investment. And the ROI on a V8, especially the 5.3, is pretty much going to exceed everything else out there. Sure, you can spend 30 grand on an LT1, and it's an awesome swap with the 8-speed. Sure, you can spend 20 grand on a 6.2 all-aluminum high-compression LS. But you spend $10,000 or less for a LS 5.3. You have an engine that's going to go the distance. It's going to give you that V8 experience. It's going to give you the economy and the reliability that you want in your JK, and it's going to do it all at a really low cost. What you're going to notice with the 5.3 is it will push you down the highway at 75, 80 with no issue. When you get into some of the mountain grades, it's just going to downshift. It's going to downshift like the 3.8 does. Maybe not as dramatic. With a 6-speed transmission, things are a lot better. It's still going to be a really nice vehicle to drive. Our personal 5.3 LS JK had 321s in it with 32-inch tires, and it cruised down the highway at about 1,600 RPM. We're averaging about 21 miles to the gallon, and we could go over 400 miles on a tank of gas. I don't think you can say that about most V8 conversions in a JK. Another advantage of the 5.3 LS is the fact that GM made it basically the standard engine across their truck SUV line for the Gen 4 vehicles. Parts are readily available. Aftermarket parts, camshafts, intakes, headers are readily available. It's probably one of the most supported engines in the world. They're not rare and hard to find like some of the Hemis, and especially if you have a custom install like a hybrid, trying to get things like air conditioning hoses and power steering lines, you have to custom make them. Not so with our 5.3 conversion. Our 5.3 conversion has been around for over 10 years. We use factory AC lines, factory power steering lines, factory accessories, alternator, power steering pump. We don't have to notch the frame running the GM accessory drive over on the right side. We don't have to worry about the upper control arm coming up and smacking it. We don't have to worry about fabricating really short custom power steering lines because the power steering pump is on the left side. Just all that's out the window. Basically, you drop the motor in with the easy mounts, you hook all that stuff up, and if you ever do blow a power steering pump hose or an AC line, you just go to your local dealer and buy another one. Now, I wouldn't put a 5.3 in anything past about 2014 JK because it went out of production in around 2014. But if you have an early JK, 7, 8, 9, 10, they're fabulous engines. We did a lot of videos, if you want to go back, and we call them budget builds because our in-house bill starts at $14,999. So for under $15,000, you can have a professionally done V8 swap in your JK. And a swap that'll probably go, like I said, longer than your JK will go. And you can't say that about a lot of the aftermarket modifications, especially if you're going to turbocharge or supercharge. Another advantage of the 5.3 and the LSs in general is how docile they are. These engines are extremely docile. Your wife will drive them, you can take them off-road, crawl them all day. There is no whine from a supercharger. There is no rubber band effect in the power band because you have a blower that's winding up and going from normally aspirated into boost. It's just an honest engine. And yes, it doesn't have the horsepower of the 6.2s, it doesn't have the horsepower of the LTs, but you don't really need that horsepower most of the time. So 90% of the time, the 5.3 is going to do exactly what you want it to do. Another consideration is the 5.3s tend to run cooler. Because they are a smaller displacement engine, they got more meat in the block. We find that the 5.3s can run on stock radiators and fans. In fact, the Jeep I'm driving right now has a stock radiator and fan. My wife's personal JK for those 10 years ran the stock radiator and fan, and that was here in Las Vegas hauling kids around. We didn't beef anything up in the drivetrain because they can handle the 5.3. If you go to 40s and a 6.2, you're probably going to start breaking stuff, so you got to go to bigger axles, bigger drive shafts, etc. So I look at the 5.3 as the engine that can get the job done. If you're a guy that's just disappointed with the V6 performance, you just can't cruise on the highway as fast as you would like to comfortably, or you can't pass, you really don't want to break the bank as far as the budget goes, and you want something that you can depend and rely on. You don't want a modification that's going to cause you don't want a modification that you're going to constantly having to mess with because you put a supercharger on and the tune isn't right and the transmission's not shifting right and you worry about it. 5.3 may be the engine for you. The few times that you might be going up the Baker Grade in California with the air conditioning on and it's 105 degrees out, that 5.3 might downshift a few gears where the 6.2 wouldn't. But the trade-off is an engine that costs significantly less, runs on regular gas, has reliability and durability, and I'm not going to take anything away from the 6.2s. I've had a 6.2 in my JK for 10 years and it's been 100% reliable. I've got 88,000 miles on it. But compared to what else is out there, whether it's putting headers on a 3.8, putting a throttle body spacer on a 3.8, the 5.3 is going to get you basically the same power that a 3.8 is going to get you with a blower on it, but it's going to do it with basically a factory stock engine, OE, operating systems, very few complications. I doubt you're going to see many blown 3.8s go 300,000 miles and deliver the economy and mileage that a 5.3 will. So if we look at the numbers, you go out and you buy a blower for $6,000, you put it in your 3.8 in the short term, that's probably not a bad investment, especially if you're going to sell that vehicle in a year or two. But 10 years down the road, and yes, I've had customers with Jeeps on the road going on 10 years, you look at the ROI on a 5.3 and the fact that you haven't had to replace the blower, the fact you haven't had to replace any of the drivetrain components or the engine itself, that's where the math shows. In addition, you're going to have the driving experience of a real V8, sound of a V8 and a torque of a V8. And I know I'm kind of repetitious on that, but I say that because I get guys come in the shop all the time and they've got powerful V6s and they brag about that, and that's really good. But for me, an old hot rodder, I can get into these V6s that are 400 horsepower, but unless they sound, pull, have linear throttle response, and just the whole driving experience of a V8, I'm not interested. And the 5.3 will give you that. This is a video I want to do for a while because in the background we're selling a lot of 5.3 kits for guys that want an entry-level swap, and we're doing some 5.3 builds in-house, and I think it's just an overlooked option for a lot of you guys out there. And the 5.3 really comes down to, do I want to dump a whole lot of time and money and effort into making my V6 perform, or just step up to a V8? And while you're going to have a little more labor and money into it, the end result is going to pay off in the long term. After this test drive, we're probably going to be driving some LT4s, LT1s, and these other fire-breathing V8s that we have in the shop. So I wanted to do a quick video on this 5.3 and just tell you guys my opinion on it. I would be completely happy with this engine if I had a lighter JK, or a JK that didn't require anything more. So we're going to hit the mountain on this cool day in this 5.3, and we'll see you soon.